So I want to talk this afternoon about something that is really important to me. So when I look at my goals for 2017, I actually realized that I have one overwhelming goal. And you know what? I think I will take I'll take a microphone. I feel so behind the podium here. May I have a microphone? If I need my notes. This is much better and easier because we're actually a small group. I decided I didn't want to live in fear. And so on November 9th, the day after the US election, I deleted all of my social media apps. I don't know how many other people did the same thing. But as I've talked to a number of people, this was something in which I was not alone. And what I realized is that as I was ingesting more and more of my feed, I was actually seeing more people talk about fear and how terrorized they felt and how confused they were. And rather than feeding this fear, I decided to take a step back. Because for me, this isn't a moment to be terrified or fearful. This is actually a moment to be curious. And so as I got off social media, and I had a moment where I started to kind of reflect back on where I had been spending my time, I realized a few things. One, I realized that I had replaced real relationships with people, and people I cared about, with the theater of posting. I actually knew more about the lives of people who posted frequently onto Facebook or Twitter or Instagram than I knew about what was happening in the lives of the people that I actually truly cared about. And that was disturbing to me. The second thing that was disturbing to me is I took a step back and I stopped ingesting as much information and as many posts as I had been ingesting, was the fact that the feed that had started off as something where I could actually keep track of what my friends were doing, what my family was doing, had actually morphed into something where so many things were fighting for my attention. And at some point, the feed had become algorithms that were more about posting and surfacing to me polarizing posts about politics, and people sharing things that they felt a sense of urgency in terms of me needing to see, whether that was about things happening around the world or causes that they cared about. And in between all of these were high highs and low lows of people posting about their new puppies and their children. And as I took a step back, I realized that in centralizing all of this, we had created something that was moving so fast and we could move so quickly that it actually made it difficult to care about anything. What I realized in looking at this was that social media, even before fake news, even before all of the things that we're now starting to see, had been compromised. And our original ideas and our original vision for what this was supposed to be had been morphed into something that actually promoted more and more extremism and more drama and more heightened emotion, because that was actually what was getting to the top of the feed. And in thinking about and looking at the fact that most everyone I knew and the people sitting around here and all of the folks that we've trained on the rules of social media are posting about their most precious things into this feed, and at the same point in time, it had been weaponized by a small groups of very well-organized people who were using it to actually put forth influence towards extremism. I asked myself the question then, how did we get here? And I actually believe it's three things. I think the number one thing that we did is we traded the social network for social media. The network, the ability for each of us to connect to not only the people that we already know, but the people that we should know, we actually traded that ability to communicate, that ability to have new and interesting networks created for the purposes of meeting and interacting and building relationships with new people. We traded that in for social media, which really actually follows a 20th century model of broadcast and capturing attention and aggregating audiences. And at the exact moment that we actually had an opportunity with the most effective, most powerful organizing network that's ever been created, we actually ankled it. And we chose instead to focus in on a media model where it was about, I post out to you, you follow me, and we're not about actually building relationships with other people. That's not the point. I believe that actually is the point. And so as we traded a social network for social media, we also decided that a centralized feed was the answer. That in convenience and in connections that allowed us to very quickly keep up with things, that actually was what we had all been looking for and what we had all been trying to build. And the reality is that the centralized feed is fundamentally vulnerable, and I do not see another way for it not to be. At any point in time when we've ever, as an industry or as technologists, focused in on building centralized versus distributed systems, the results are actually not about innovation. And as we look specifically at this centralized feed that is desensitizing us to caring about any one issue, because we are seeing so many issues flitter before our eyes. Sorry. This is, I believe, the fundamental challenge that we have to navigate over the next 10 years. Because the last thing that we did is, while we put this in place, and very quickly and very subtly, the feed and the algorithm has actually promoted more and more drama and extremism at the expense of the people that we care about, desensitizing us to any one issue because we can't care about all of them. We as an industry moved on. We moved on to invent the future, to disrupt the next industry. So we talk about Bitcoin and we talk about self-driving cars and we spend more time talking about AI, while the fundamental network that we have created is being used in a more and more insidious set of ways. I think that the promise has actually been bastardized. So, is there a solution? I think the answer is yes. And it's why, as I deleted my apps, I have never been more optimistic. Because when I look at what is possible as we move forward, I actually think, the 13-year-olds have actually figured it out. So when we look at what is happening with digital natives and with mobile natives, and the fact of the matter is that they are focused on not one big public, centralized, monolithic feed, but actually in how do they take their relationships private, ephemeral, and increasingly finding ways to express themselves in groups that are smaller and based on their interests and their passions and their goals. I think that that is actually the right model. One of the things I hear quite often when I say the answer is in dedicated networks, the answer is in interest-based networks, the answer is in meeting people that you should know and who care about the same things that you care about, or more importantly, have the same professional set of identities or interests, or have been diagnosed with the same conditions. I sometimes hear, well, isn't that going to actually create more echo chambers? And that's not actually been our experience. For example, in the last year, we've had a network for small business owners and the self-employed grow rapidly. And what's been fascinating is that on every other platform where the conversation has been compromised and weaponized with political discourse or lack thereof, this network, which brings together people of all sorts of political affiliations, has actually stayed focused on the topic at hand, which is how to run a successful business. What are the things that people need to do to be able to get new customers and make more money? And the support, the encouragement, and the information has been nothing short of profound. We did not see political conversations break out in this network. And yet, it's not just for information sharing. What's really powerful from my perspective about dedicated networks is while they start in one way, they can be utilized in ways that are much less about talk and much more about action. For example, we have another network that is for people whose lives are touched by type 1 diabetes, either because they're teenagers that were diagnosed as children, young adults that have been living with the disease for 15 years, or their caregiving parents. And while the network started for the purposes of support and encouragement and information sharing for a chronic disease, something really magical happened. One of the members of the network, her daughter was actually denied coverage by Humana, which is a large insurance company in the US. And the community rallied to her defense and immediately highlighted to Humana that this was an injustice. And within days, Humana changed its course. When there is an opportunity to harness the power of an identity or an interest or a place where people can simply focus on connecting to members who are near them, connecting to members who are like them, and connecting to members who care about the same topics. These aren't echo chambers. These are actually opportunities to build deep and real relationships. So when I come back to where I started, again, I'm more optimistic than I have ever been, because I believe that this is the first time that the results of a vulnerable and centralized feed are actually being talked about, not only by us as an industry, but I think in much wider conversations. I don't believe that the answer is government intervention, especially when you see the impact that technology has on culture and now on government in terms of being able to organize. I think it's going to be ground up. I think it's going to be organic. And I think it's going to be about people realizing and taking the same path that I've taken in the last 3 months to recognize and realize that when we talk and we don't act, that well-organized, well-orchestrated group of people that are seeking to influence in very negative ways our social networks, that they win. When we are afraid and we're posting about our fear, they win. When we choose to talk over choosing to act, they win. When we look at and react to every single manufactured outrage and manufactured incident, we lose. And I don't think, and I don't believe, that is why we have all worked as hard as we've worked to create new and powerful technologies that connect people all around the world. And I believe that we will, through moving networks into a distributed system, choosing dedicated networks over one centralized, one-size-fits-all feed, by moving more conversations private, by moving more conversations to simply dedicated but remaining public, that we will find new connections, new opportunities, and fundamentally, significantly more resilience to a small group of bad actors being able to have a global impact on institutions, on the economy, and on fundamentally people's sentiments about the world around them. And I know that it's a fight, and I know that it's an opportunity that I'm certainly happy and honored to be a part of. And I really appreciate you guys taking a few minutes to hear my pitch and my desire to include you in this action. So thank you very much.